Hello and welcome to Night Clerk Radio, episode 81, Vaporwave and VR. With me, as always, is my good friend and co-host, Burke, as we delve into virtual realms, realities, you might say, in this episode. Philosophically, of course, I don't have a VR headset. Yeah.
No, me neither. Yeah.
We didn't sign on to the metaverse, so, we're
I'm
Luddites, basically.
I'm meta-adverse, more like it. Know what I'm saying? Hey.
That's pretty good, actually.
Thank you.
So this episode is going to be exploring the intersection of vaporwave as a scene, a community, a culture, and an aesthetic, and virtual reality, which has a lot of connecting points because both aesthetically, the iconography of vaporwave is certainly informed by earlier attempts, pushes at VR, and today the technology is cheaper than ever. So a lot of artists are actually using VR in their work. And so we'll be talking a little bit about all of that.
Yeah, there's a little bit of everything.
Yeah. I am interested, especially in VR, because it's not only a current technology, it's also a retro technology. Like it has, people thought, first envisioned VR back in pretty soon after computers were around, like back in the 60s.
Oh, yeah.
And they're like, hey, wait, we could put a monitor around somebody's, head and we could do something. And then, so all the way back in the 50s and 60s. And then, there have been these successive waves of VR. Like the stuff in the 60s was all just in R&D departments. But in the 80s, there was an attempt to popularize it. And then in the 90s, there was an attempt to popularize it. And then it seems every 5 or 10 years, they're like, hey, wait, we finally cracked it. In the 2010s, it just hasn't left. Like there's just enough, Silicon Valley has enough money to just keep it going. They really want it to happen. And they're going to keep making it happen until we finally actually adopt it on a wide scale basis. It seems like.
Yeah, I think that's part of why Vaporwave and VR is so interesting to me, because along the lines you were just talking about, virtual reality is maybe the most hauntological technology that I can think of, like haunted. Like it is in a constant state of nostalgia for some VR that never existed. It's like a future that never really arrives and like a past you never really experienced. It's just like as a concept, it's just always shows up, like you said, every 5 to 10 years. I think this is the closest we've gotten to it having any real. I guess now it's arrived. I don't know. I don't have a good sense because you just, Oculus stuck around to get, as you point out, by Meta, Facebook bought, and the Vive, Steam, Valve has theirs. There's lots of little headsets that you can just strap a phone into that work. So I think it's more omnipresent than ever, but it's still rooted in some kind of novelty that we thought it would never arrive. Like I think flying cars would be the same thing. Yeah. If they ever existed. Because even VR that exists now, I mean, there's obviously counterexamples to this, but so much of it is, I guess I'm thinking of games because that's where it largely comes into.
Yeah. Games and porn, right?
Games and porn and novelty stuff or gimmicky stuff, I should say, around business meetings and whatnot, is retro because it's still hard to have enough hardware to really do it well. So even a lot of Vaporwave, I keep saying Vaporwave games, virtual reality games, still kind of look like old and shitty, except for a few notable examples, like Half-Life Alyx or something. But even those, so many of those games are just nostalgia VR tack on to a game that already exists. Like, hey, you like Fallout? Well, here's Fallout VR. It's the same game, but now it doesn't work on 2 screens. It's just very weird. I think Vaporwave is very haunted in the lack of its realization of any real potential, any real transformative technological potential.
Yeah, it's a technology driven by the ideology and the beliefs of the people who run technology companies more than anything else. And they're all informed by science fiction. And also that they're all trying to get their own moonshot, right? They want every technology, whatever. They want to be the next smartphone. They want to be the next iPhone. They want to be the next Facebook. And they just think that if they can just get it just right, it'll take off like wildfire, like smartphones did. And, we're now half the planet has one of these things in their pocket. If they could get it just right. So it's this very addictive, like, just keep spending money. You'll eventually, if you can just type the right thing, if you can develop the right app for it, you'll get it. And which is, also very vaporwave. It's this like capital endlessly spending money in order to profit is not enough. Growth is not enough. It has to be the once in a generation growth. It has to be the once in a generation, like, success story. That's the only level of satisfaction that they get. And they just think that because there are all these great narratives about virtual reality, like cyberpunk novels and great is varied, but like it's certainly in the public's mind that virtual reality is the future. We'll eventually all be in the cyberspace, in the metaverse and wearing helmets. And they in a nutshell, they see Ready Player One as a blueprint. So that's why they have, and the money spigot has not been turned off. So they're going to keep trying away. So I think that's the reason why.
So many IPs everywhere.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we got to have all the DLC for everything you see now. They want DLC for everything, And you're right. This is the most hauntological technology. It is haunted by these past fiction versions of this. And
there's just like a real tension between like the past fiction becoming the blueprint for the modern or future aesthetic. Like, I just imagine like the 20-year, 30-year anniversary of like Johnny Mnemonic. I just imagine them selling like limited edition headsets that look like his headset and stuff. It's like, no, man, that was like shitty 90s tech, but it's retro. It looks cool.
And they want Lawnmower Man, VR headsets and setups.
That's what I say about the graphics. Stuff still looks like Lawnmower Man now. If you look at a lot of these like shovelware VR games, because you can't do much more. So they sort of.
I know from a lot of like, I spent some time watching, VR game playthroughs on YouTube out of curiosity. And so far, they still haven't gone beyond the paradigm of you're standing somewhere and you can manipulate things with your hands. And that's what the game's about, like picking up guns and loading them and manipulating them. And that's it. Like, you don't, they haven't, obviously for, the commercial VR headsets, they haven't solved movement because movement's kind of intractable. If you walk, you're going to run into a wall, or you have to be set up in a harness to keep you on, in a omnidirectional treadmill, which is, adding $5,000 to the cost, and you have to have a room dedicated to it now because of all the setup. Like, so you get your little shooting gallery type things and puzzles games, and that's about it. Like, what else can you do because of limitations? Yeah,
I think one thing that should acknowledge also is that there are some popular uses of VR that are fairly wholesome. So I only mention because I know in our circle of friends, there's trans women who really like VR chat.
Oh, yeah.
Because it's a place where they can kind of like be safe and not worry about like bodies and where they are, but still feel like they're interacting because they're spread out across the country in some capacity. So I know like VR chat is very popular for that as like a bonding tool.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a good point. Like, that's the sad thing about the metaverse, right? Is they can't even get to that level of technical sophistication. It just looks like shit compared to VR chat. And and furries are well represented in there, paying a lot of money to create custom avatars that represent their personas and that kind of thing.
Yeah, so like the hyperreal aspects of it do have some therapeutic potential, but again, it just falls into this ontological thing of like a future that's never really realized. Because I think VR chat did and maybe repealed it. I don't know. I only see when they post stuff in their Discord. I think VR chat did shoot themselves in the foot with like some modding limitations or stuff that really took away a lot of the fun of being able to like exist outside of your body in some sense. Like,
yeah, that's unfortunate. Yeah,
I feel like I remember there was some complaining amongst our friends about VR chat's handling of that, which I think Second Life did something similar.
Yeah, I mean, Second Life again. One of those earlier waves of VR. We're gonna be online, and you'll have to have virtual real estate and all this other jazz.
Yeah, and I think that's just a side effect of you want to monetize yourself. You have to get rid of mods because no one's going to pay $5 for the fursuit if they can just make it.
Exactly. Well, researching this, I did remember about the Gartner cycle, a hype cycle, which it has like 5 stages: the innovation trigger, the peak of inflated expectations, the trough of disillusionment, the slope of enlightenment, and the plateau of productivity, and the thing is, I don't think we're ever going to get to the plateau of productivity with VR because we've already figured out everything we can do with it, like outside of like remote technical work, but like the network connectivity. Like I could see commercial uses of like manipulating drones in dangerous work environments to do, robots to do certain types of labor, but like that's a niche technical application, Yeah, it's never going to become like the next smartphone.
No, I think that's much more likely to be like AR, right? Which is augmented reality, which is not, the whole headset replacing your entire field of vision, but basically laying elements on top of what you see with your eyes in general or your screen.
Yeah.
So some of this kind of already exists where, I'm just giving an example so people know what I'm talking about. Like a lot of apps like Amazon and Home Depot and stuff will have like, see if this works in your room for products. Like for Amazon, you can like click, see like, how does this look in my room? And you give it permission to use your camera and it'll like, you point it where you want to push this flower pot or whatever. And it'll like put a little image of that flower pot on that shelf or something.
Oh yeah.
And you can be like, oh, I think that looks good. Like that type of cheesy stuff. I don't know. I don't think it's serious adoption, but that is an example of probably a more realistic path to having a constant like digital overlay on your vision more than the headset and stuff.
Like Google Translate with like
the 8th attempt at doing Google Glass.
Yeah. Well, like with a phone, like you point a phone at a sign that's in a foreign language and it gives you a rough, machine translation of it,
and it actually replaces it further than that. It doesn't just translate it, but actually like replaces the text and the font in the image. It's pretty cool.
Yeah. No, and so that I can see getting that kind of widespread usage. But again, that's just going into the infrastructure of smartphones, which already exist. It's not going to be a paradigm shifting. Like we're not all going to be getting VR suits like in Ready Player One to go into the grid or whatever the fuck they call it. In that.
Something stupid.
Yeah, and so that's sort of the backdrop of this. Is like VR is this like technology that certain people really want us to adopt, and it's already had its shot. It's a technology that has come and gone, and we have seen it now multiple times, and it's technically better, but it's just not going to happen, at least in the way that they hope it's going to happen.
Right.
And so this capitalist like disappointment and failed and waste of money and all this other is the perfect backdrop for like Vaporwave, because Vaporwave.
That's exactly what I was going to say. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Wow. It's amazing how that works out.
And so a lot of the Vaporwave people are using VR to inform their work. And I think the thing that inspired this episode is 100% Electronica, run by George Clanton, because he does these virtual utopia concerts and music videos, because like the technology now, you can do VR, quote unquote, by getting like a 360-degree camera, which are like a couple $100 now. And you plop it down in the middle of a room. And then I think what he does is he green screens himself and so it creates a virtual like set. And the green screen elements are like over here, but then there's CG elements over here. So you can like scan around and look as like, he's not doing a concert in a warehouse or his, studio, wherever it is. It's in, an alien nightclub with little aliens dancing.
Hank Hill's dancing. And, you can put in all this Vaporwave, kind of retro iconography in there. Almost like Ready Player One. Like, here's a bunch of stuff. A lot of imagery.
And it's a lot of fun. Yeah. Like I've listened to some of these videos and concerts and they're just playful, right? Like it's just them having fun and like you get to see them talk and I really like the green screen elements with the CG stuff, right? Like it's really cool to see people like it's also a cheap way to do sets. Like instead of like, to do a music video, you can just like take a live person and put them in a virtual environment and like make it a 3D environment. And it's pretty fun.
Yeah. And just also to be clear, just so it's like, we're talking about this now, but he's actually been doing this for a couple of years. Just to also like, I think maybe 2017 or 2018 was when they made the first attempts to do these sort of like 360 music videos.
this has been going on for a while, and certainly it did pick up popularity in 2020, you know, as people were because of the pandemic. And I think, I mean, he's still doing it though now, like, and he's not the only one too. Like there's a producer, Massey, who threw a boat party on the Golden Ice 64 frigate level with Craig Nose as one example, where like they took the data from the N64 game and loaded it into a 3D environment and put the green screen DJs in the little pilot house of the boat. It's a neat little set. So, and that's not Vaporwave, but like other artists are experimenting with this kind of thing. So I quite like the technology to used in this creative way. But what were some of the things that you like? There's a ton of people doing it though. Like, or there's maybe not a ton, but there's a good number of artists in experimenting with VR stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's one of them. We'll have a link to that, but
we'll have a bunch of links because we went out and tried to dig up anybody I could find doing anything related. So of course there's like a big playlist of various 100p artists are quite frankly the largest list that I could find. But you posted some other playlists and stuff. Was it Late Night Lights? The Betamax?
Yeah. Late Night Lights is a late night lo-fi festival, online festival.
Right.
And that's the thing, right? Yeah, that's what also George Clooney's doing. It's like a festival, like a big, like an event that you do online. But the Late Night Lights one was done in Second Life, actually.
Right.
So
right.
It's a 3D environment, but it's not like we should mention that YouTube does have virtual reality support. YouTube, I think it's called YouTube 360. But like certain videos, if you watch them, they will have a little like arrows in the top left corner. And if you click and hold while your mouse is in that little field, you can like spin the camera around. And which is really neat. And that's how you manipulate it. And some of them let you move around, I think. But like most of them have a fixed camera position, but the angle is up to you.
One that I found was I was messing around with was the music video for Show and Tell by Adam Kane, which is on 100% electronica too. But it's this where it's like this little drone flight, basically, I'll say is like the general presence of the camera. Like you're moving through this kind of like polygon-ish video game, like a untextured Deus Ex type street.
Yeah.
And then you head into a club. But yeah, the whole time there's a little hand you can like drag and look around everywhere. And
yeah,
you know, it's like you're at the show. And
yeah,
but I've never actually messed with it in terms of like, I don't have any VR equipment, as we said at the beginning. So I've never been able to like, I guess if you have the headset, then the headset becomes the mouse dragging you around the.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's
the idea. That's a very
idea.
boomer question, but the idea is that then you're really in there.
Yeah, so like it's really like a bunch of artists, not just these small indie ones, but a couple of big ones have like released at least a music video or something in some sort of VR using this YouTube technology. And it seems to, like it does seem to be. It reminds me in a sense of like Half-Life Valve, where like. Or like the Half-Life Alyx thing, because it's like the company sees, oh, this technology is possible. Okay, we'll do a thing in that. Okay, see, we did a thing in this. Does anybody else want this? No. Okay, back to our regular stuff. Like everyone's like everyone explores and it's like, let's try this VR stuff, and they figure out some things for it, and then they just like never. There's no follow up. They're like, okay, we did it. No one cared, or no one cared that much. Like. Like Elton John put out a VR thing, but it was interesting.
I think Coldplay did too.
I watched a couple of minutes of the Elton John one, and it was interesting because it was a VR 180 thing where the camera only had, you couldn't rotate it. You could only rotate it like 180 degrees. So it was more locked in, but you know, it was a whole little show as Elton John, you know, performed. So I watched a couple of minutes of it. I didn't watch the whole thing. But yeah, I thought that was interesting that he just said, no, we're just going to lock it in a little bit so we don't have to deal with 360 degrees of stuff to, you know, because if you're making something, obviously you have to like account for everything around the camera because you don't know what the audience is going to be looking at any given instant.
Exactly.
Yeah. So that is an interesting challenge for them.
Yeah. I mainly focused on the more Vaporwave related ones. I don't really have much to say about, like, there are tracks either people know because they're all on 100p, which is like one of the biggest sources of And they're not all vaporwave tracks too. That's the other thing, I guess, before we get genre angry, it's a lot of it is 100% electronica, which is a vaporwave label, but they release a lot of electronic music, and so there's also just a lot of like club music or like rave music. Or others.
There is Gorillaz did a 360 music video, Spirit House, Saturn Bars. Square Pusher did one. Let's see, another artist. Who was it? Nightclub, but the animation was done. The music video was done by Titmouse, which is a well-known animation studio. It was done a bunch of Adult Swim stuff. So we're obviously one of the, let's try this tech out. Okay, yeah, we figured it out. All right. But yeah, so like there's a lot of artists. Bjork did one. That's not surprising, actually.
That's cool.
Bjork's was actually live. So it was Bjork singing on a beach, and she's walking around. And so you can follow her as she's walking around you. And they kind of do fade ins and fade outs to different locations. But it's still, Bjork's looking off somewhere. You can spin the camera around and see what Bjork's looking at,
What is Bjork looking at?
Yeah. What is Bjork looking at? And now she's looking at me. Yeah.
Oh my God.
That's the thing though. It's like a novelty, right? Like it's still not like you can do interesting things with it and people are like figuring it out and coming with interesting things you can do with them. But like, it just takes more work, not only to make it, but also to like appreciate it. Right. Cause like you have to, you can't just sit back and watch it. You have to actively like manipulate the camera to see everything.
Sure. And, I think anytime any medium tries to expand out into some new way, there's always that finding yourself awkward first couple of years, right? So, I mean, like the first 10 years of music videos are like weird and ineffective and just experimental and stuff, Especially everyone kind of thinks of, Video Killed the Radio Star and MTV and like, Thriller is really, I think, what launched like, these could be like movies about songs and like this real like weird production. But there were music videos before MTV that were just like the novelty is you saw the band playing and you weren't at the concert, right? You didn't have to catch them on Ed Sullivan and you didn't have to go to the concert. But here's like a video of some fucking like, I don't know, pick a 70s rock band or disco band or whatever.
Velvet Underground.
Playing or whatever. Yeah. And it took a long time for that to become like kind of this gimmicky little like, they're playing. It's a music video to like, it's a music video. I imagine at some point there'll be some kind of breakthrough in that regard. I don't know who will do it. And, it'll be interesting it'll be more interesting if it is done by a smaller niche internet genre. Like that feels more appropriate, but I think stuff's so fragmented. That it'll probably happen independently for different groups based on what genre you're into and kind of who does it. But to me, I think the most interesting presentation and the most interesting use of VR is the virtual festival to me personally. That's why I think like the late night lights is so cool. I love the idea that like a music festival has like a 15-step documentation of how to log into the music festival. I like unironically, like that's this. I love that there's like, you got to click this, you got to click this, you got to install this, make sure you're all set. It's cool. But I just think that in the same way that we have friends who use VR chat, I think the most power there is like shared experiences you can't get otherwise. I'm less interested in just having different visual, like a different kind of music video is less interesting to me. Like I'm less interested in different visuals while the song plays anyway, because I really just listen to music anyway. So for me personally, like alternate music videos, they can be cool and they can be like a lot of like interesting artistic aspects to them that you can look at and analyze. But I think to me, like generating a novel shared experience, even if it's for whatever reason in our social programming is maybe not as good as it would be to be like truly in person. Like if we actually, if you and I like met up and then we drove to St. Louis and we went to like one of Ronnie's shows or whatever. I'm sure that'd be an amazing experience.
Oh, sure. 100%.
But that's not feasible. For a lot of reasons, because I live across the country.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'd ever actually invest in VR, but like the idea, like conceptually, that's a more interesting future goal to me for VR is to be able to like throw on a headset and in some sense, kind of at least sort of be there in some capacity in which I'm in control because I can look around and stuff versus like watching a video of a set after the fact.
Yeah, no, those are really excellent points. I had not even considered the comparison to like music videos, but yeah, exactly. There's a whole like evolution of the art format as people figure out what works and what doesn't, and then like people get bored of things. That's why we don't have like fucking German expressionism as every movie. Like people
cowards.
Yeah, people want different things. They want novelty in artistic sense. I do want. There is a HBO put out a documentary called "We Met in Virtual Reality," which is entirely shot in VR chat and is about how people are using VR chat. And I watched the trailer for it. I haven't watched the whole thing yet, but the trailer has like people teaching yoga in it and having long distance relationships. So I definitely want to watch that now to kind of see what else is being used. Because I think there's people on the niches, on the outskirts that are the innovators, right? Like those are the people that are going to figure out something first, and then like other people, pick it up gradually. Yeah, the shared social experience, that would be the killer app for it, and it's just like getting to that level where that is possible. Like, I mean, maybe it is possible in VR chat, and it's just every other implementation of it sucks, and maybe VR chat is starting to suck because they are wanting more control instead of letting people do what they want. I don't know.
Yeah. Or just some things never take off or peter out, or now there's a whole new hype, you
need a certain critical mass of people to really drive its spread. So, yeah.
Yeah. I think realistically VR is limited by economic conditions, right? Like everyone fucking loves Half-Life, but not everyone can get hundreds of dollars of hardware to run Alex or something, right? Like, so even if there was some big, it needs more than a killer app. It really needs some massive reduction in price. I'm trying to think of a comparable technology that had almost no adoption until it plummeted. I'm sure there's.
I mean, smartphones. I mean, like mobile phones.
Yeah.
I think that like the price for comparing it from like 20 years ago for a mobile phone, from like 40 years ago, from like car phones in the 80s, right?
Yeah, you would have to go back to that because now it's almost gone back up. Like phones almost dipped for a little bit. And now they're so subsidized by plans and other things that they've kind of like by MSRP have gone back up.
Yeah. But now there's so many out there now like that, even people in the poorest nations can have smartphones. I mean, that's the computer. That's your computer for like a large portion of humanity.
For everything. Yeah.
Not even a laptop or a tablet or anything. So technology is weird.
It is weird. Technology adoption thereof. It's always weird and it's always fraught with unexpected delays. That's why, not VR and maybe it's on topic, but that's why I think a lot of the like hagiography around like the current batch of large language models and air quotes AI and stuff is sort of like, it's just, there's so many economic factors that go into like its realistic adoption that it's hard to really predict. Because, I mean, VR was kind of like largely a forgotten joke until the first round of Oculus. And they weren't great, but they were enough to like get people excited. And they've kind of coasted on that for what, like 10 years now? When was that first Oculus?
Like 2014, I think. So almost 10 years, yeah.
So for almost 10 years, but then it seems like haven't really been able to capitalize on that for whatever reason. And I think there's I think that's a very difficult, uncanny valley to push out of. Like I do think there's a lot of technical limits in terms of being able to do that in a cheap way. Like it was really interesting when John Carmack, he's probably like a gross libertarian tech bro at his core, but made Doom and then was like CTO at Oculus and Meta for a while. And then now he left to do like his own little AGI AI startup nonsense. But he's like a really interesting tweeter because he doesn't care about his audience. He just like talks about like really obscure tech shit that he's trying to work on with Oculus. And he'll just make tweets of like, oh, re-reference this point, like some obscure C coding reference of like, oh, figured out if I re-reference this pointer from this to this, then I can shave, 1,000th of a millisecond off the response time. Every little bit goes a long way towards making this work because your eye and visual system is like expects certain level of fidelity that's actually really hard to recreate.
Yeah.
It's interesting. There's like all these little tech hurdles of doing that. And I know I'm at the end. You can tell I'm getting towards the end of the episode because we're kind of veering off topic a little bit. But I think that's one of the reasons, that like Vaporwave and VR will continue to be like interesting bedfellows, because I think VR is just always going to be this unrealized potential, this always kind of becoming of nothing.
Yeah, no, I think the Vaporwave also like goes back to like the previous waves of Vaporwave or of VR, because looking at this oral history of virtual reality on The Verge, and they talk about like West Coast VR had a lot to do with acid, I think, because people were kind of mind prepping for alternative realities. And so they talk about like in the 90s, they got artists to experiment with VR and make like VR things, like an interactive movie or an immersive movie called Angels, but then a interactive virtual environment called Osmose. Char's work, both Osmose and Ephemera, were just poetic. People cried, usually men. I had a number of people come to me and say that they experienced Osmose. They felt they had experienced dying. They experienced what death was. They weren't afraid of death anymore. This was due to the sensation of buoyancy and because this was back when they were experimenting with harnesses and stuff like that to like allow floating and those kind of experiences as part of the whole virtual reality. So I think like this is, and these people who were, that was their form of early career stuff was back in the 90s, and they're still in control of companies, or they've influenced other people. And so this is built in a cultural thing for Silicon Valley. And the people running this stuff is like, they think this is their utopia. And, for Vaporwave is about lost utopias, So,
yeah. That's true too. Yeah. Utopian virtual reality.
All coming together.
Yeah, I do love that Verge article because it does have some great retro tech pictures in it. There's like the bodysuit that has just miles of SCSI and serial cables pouring off the back of it. Like, who would ever? Yeah. Like, I know it's a prototype. Like, they're getting there, but it's so fucking funny to me.
It's great.
But I think that whole set of articles, because that part of a larger set of like 9 articles on virtual reality that are connected. I think they're interesting. The oral history is long, but it is really, really, really interesting. Because it's one of those things you don't really think about people working on for so long. But I do remember now, I wish I dug them up before we hit record, that even on YouTube, there are some old like Bell Labs or somebody like late 70s, early 80s, like VR, AR examples of like, imagine a map. And you could type in an address and it lights up on this map. And it's like the size of a wall, like where this address is and stuff.
Yeah. On the other hand, there's those AT&T commercials. Can you imagine doing this in the future? You will. And they like got a lot of it right too.
Yeah.
Like, you'll be able to say things and your computer will understand you and we'll be able to do it. And like, you could just message, have video calls with grandma from across the world. And like, I guess we'll do the Zoom call, mom. Yeah, fine.
Yeah. That's the utopian part of it. It's like, it's going to be this great utopian future. And it just all gets, of course, subsumed by business for workers' productivity or whatever, so the actual reality is the nightmare, boring, very banal, but very shitty dystopia that we've ended up in, like contrasting with this like utopia. I don't know. It's just very, very hilarious to me that they thought like everyone, we'll all quit our jobs and just chill on our VR treadmills. And it's like, nah, man. Nah.
I did try and look for like, because I remember reading this article years ago about the waves of VR. So like virtual reality cycle 10 years. And then it's like, oh yeah, you want a bicycle in VR? There's like a fucking million articles about cycling in VR. It's like, oh God, that's depressing. But I mean, I get it. If you're like in a shitty environment, you don't want to you don't want to get hit by a car while cycling.
Yep.
Yeah. VR, it's a thing. Yeah, Vaporwave as fuck. Thank you so much for listening. Our next episode, we're going to be going back to Signal Wave. There's a bunch of albums that have dropped in the last 6 months that are very interesting. So we haven't figured out which albums exactly yet, but we will be ready for some late night broken transmissions. If you haven't joined our Patreon, please check it out. Patreon.com/nightclerkradio. We do a bonus episode every month, and we have a very active Discord where I have started sharing like mixes I have been making and some experiments and making ambient music, and really good discussions too. Lots of interesting links, new albums, new music that people are sharing. Very fun. In our latest Patreon episode, we talk about the cultural implications of genius and art, and it was very good discussion. And we are on Twitter, as long as that very haunted platform exists, at Night Clerk Radio. I'm at Ross Payton. Burke is at Burke McBurkinson. We have a website, nightclerkradio.com. Facebook page exists. If you still use that, please rate and review us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, whatever you use to listen to podcasts. Tell your friends, tell your frenemies, tell your enemies even. Just get people listening. And we'll talk to you later.